see the founder of Samsung. Here in his office, I found a very interesting, saying, which said, it is written in Korean, and I got the translation in English. It said that if you have a short-term view of life, grow rice. If you have a medium-term view of life, grow trees. If you have a long-term view of life, grow your leaders. Because the leaders are going to make a difference, whether it be a company, whether it be a country, or whether it be any kind of institution that really wants to survive for a longer period of time. In fact, the best example of this is one of the oldest companies in the world is a company called Stora. It's based out of Sweden. It was actually a copper mining company. And then after that evolved into a whole bunch of companies. Now they make paper. If you again go to the Stora office, there's a very interesting traits that they describe as management traits for the future. And by the way, they've held on to it after all these years. The first and the biggest trait that they call out is what is called as moral compass, which is that if you believe that what you're doing is right, and if you believe that what you're doing is not crooked and it's not cheating somebody else, then by all means you should do it. In fact, they have a very interesting test, which is that if you don't want something to be done to you, you probably should not be doing the same thing to others. It's a very interesting kind of way of looking at it. But that was one of the traits that they have. The second trait that they have is what they call accountability. You necessarily have to be accountable for what you do. Actions are easy, provided you're clear about the fact that you have a certain result that you're taking or you're moving towards, but accountability sits behind it as an underpinning. And the third, which I thought was the most interesting trait, which I think is still very important, is what they call speed and flexibility. The Stora founders, Stora was a guild, and the Stora founders basically said, if you look at the life of a human being, which those days used to be 50 years, a life of a company at best can be 50 years. It can't be more than that. Probably it can be 30 years. And in 30 years, if they don't change substantially their fundamental business and they don't look for opportunities, they'll soon get old. So Stora as a company, very interestingly, starting off in copper mining, then went into making swords because everybody was fighting everybody else and they needed swords. And from there on, they went to make cannons. Then they made wood products. Then they finally ended up in paper. I mean, there's a whole bunch of other products that came in between. So the ability to be flexible in today's world, whether it be human beings or whether it be companies, is very critical. And along with flexibility comes a counter trait, which is called adaptability. You can be extremely flexible, but if you're not adaptable to the world around you, you fundamentally lose out in terms of gaining that competitive edge. So if I had to go to the first two traits, just to sum it up for you, it would be the moral compass, which I described. And the second would be speed, flexibility, and adaptability. This would be the second big trait that they were looking for. And the third, of course, is what I described earlier, which is accountability. These three traits, in a way, is the underpinning of what they created as an organization. And that organization has lasted for 800 years. Similarly, there's another organization like this, which you might be familiar with. It's a Japanese organization called Mitsui. Mitsui is one of the world's largest trading organizations. But Mitsui started life making samurai swords. That was their background. And from there on, they evolved. And Japanese by themselves were a very insular culture. If you've ever been to Japan, you'd find that Japanese don't necessarily move outside their frame of reference and their frame of comfort. So to make sure that they get adaptability in what they do and they remain flexible and they have the ability to try out new things, they decided to become a trading arm. So the idea of trade was that sitting in Japan, if you reach out to people, you understand people. There's some background noise coming in. And if you understand people, then what happens is your ability to understand what is happening in the marketplace changes completely. So there again, you find a very interesting kind of a wedge, if you may, of how they've used adaptability and speed, even though I must admit the Japanese are not typically known for speed, to really create an organization that is global. And Mitsui is probably one of the largest trading houses in the world. Fast forward, to the current decade, life around us has changed completely. With more and more information being available, the time to react to a marketplace situation has changed completely. In the old days, if you created a business, the business would stay there, live and thrive. The peak of the business would probably be in about a 7 to 10 year time frame. Today, those peaks come in 2 to 3. And I see it every day in the venture capital game. Because as a venture capital firm, we manage close to about 10 billion in US dollars in terms of funds. So that, just to give you a sense, is about 75,000 crores. It's a pretty large amount of corpus. And this is all belonging to the foundation. Mr. Premji's donated money to the foundation, so that's what we manage. And to that extent, we invest in technology and we invest in healthcare. And we have found that the speed at which some of the newer companies operate is very different from the older companies. Though as organizations age, you would find that slowly within organizations, people become older, their reaction times reduce. I mean, they get married, they have children. Their focus moves from, when you're young, you're focused on doing one thing. Soon what happens is that your focus changes to doing a lot of other things. And as you age, you become slower. Older organizations are not able to react at the speed at which younger organizations are able to kind of do business. And the reason you realize is it's partly people and it's partly the ability of people to learn new things. So if I've done something in a particular way for 20, 30 years, my ability to change that and move into something new is minimal. So what happens is somebody who's got that new skill comes in and disrupts these older companies very quickly. The other big thing that happens in older companies is we have this concept of an organizational chart and a hierarchy. Hierarchy by itself slows down companies. So for example, if I have a person who's doing the job, who's sitting on the rock face, and if you have other people who are their bosses who sit above, the way decision-making works in most traditional companies is the person on the rock face who's in the front of the customer typically will relay the customer problem to his manager. And his or her manager will relay this to their manager. And so it goes up, all the way up the organizational ladder, right to the top, and then it comes all the way down. The more levels you have, the more organizations slow down. In younger organizations, what they do is, in most cases, the level of empowerment is significantly higher. And people are expected to take the right decisions sitting in front of the customer, and that creates speed. And for that, the leadership traits that you require in the new age, they don't necessarily change from what was there in the past, but there are some significant changes that are required in terms of the way people operate in the new environment. One is employees need, and everybody who works in some of the firms require enormous level of self-confidence. Self-confidence basically gives you the ability to articulate the position that you have very clearly. And it also gives you the ability to communicate effectively on what your thoughts are and have the ability to kind of take challenges regularly and reply to that. So that is one trait that is important. Self-confidence also, in a way, has got an effect on people around you. The minute you're self-confident, then what happens is you tend to inspire people. So think about an army. If you have a general who says, all you soldiers, go ahead, meet the enemy soldiers in the battlefield, and I will sit behind and enjoy a cup of coffee, I'm sure the soldiers wouldn't be typically inspired to go forward. So the self-confidence to lead from the front and to do something which is fairly different and lead by example becomes an important trait as we go through the leadership cycle. And that's a very important trait in today's world. The second big trait that you need, which is important, is the ability to collaborate. Knowledge is not necessarily the preserve of one or two people. Knowledge today sits everywhere. It sits on the internet. It sits on people's tables. It sits in people's minds. And the ability to actually effectively collaborate and, more importantly, understand the nuances of what other people have done and go that extra mile to figure out what is the information asymmetry that you can gain to make a difference becomes an important trait. Unfortunately, what happens is in most organizations and also in most educational systems, you come up the ladder by basically studying what is there in your textbook. Now, I'm not advocating that you don't study what is in your textbook. That's the last thing I'd like you to do. But the most important part of what you need to kind of learn really sits outside the textbook. And people work with other people. And when people work with other people, the human interaction piece and the emotional quotient piece becomes an important trait in today's world, especially when people are Instagramming all the time and people are going out there and everything that you do is out there in the open. So from that perspective, communication, collaboration becomes an extremely important trait, and the ability to do a little extra in terms of getting that extra edge through putting pieces together is what makes the difference. And you would notice that as you go through your career, you would find that people who go ahead are people who've got this very interesting trait. And that's what makes them valuable to organizations. Because people who give you a standard answer, especially an answer which everybody else will give you or which you can read from outside, that answer doesn't give you a new idea of what is going on out there, or it doesn't give you a differentiated vector. And that, I think, is one key characteristic which, if you can develop, frankly, it will really help you. From my own career perspective, if you look at it, I'm a chartered accountant. I've got close to about 7 patents in deep technology areas, including autonomous systems. So, I had to learn engineering, not because I love to learn engineering, because it's important for me to do my job. At one point of time, and it's not there in my CV, I used to be the engineering manager for the X-ray business for GE. So I've done all kinds of things in my life, and every experience has actually helped me understand that particular area better, and more importantly, help me differentiate from everybody else, because I've been able to play across different domains. I know finance, I know engineering, I know marketing, I know sales, and suddenly that becomes valuable. The more you stick to one domain, the more you become experts in one domain. As the environment around you changes, you would be caught a little bit on the wrong foot. Ideally, the employee for tomorrow is what I call a T-shaped skill set, broad at the top and has depth in one area. And you got to pick which area you want depth in. But whichever area you want to have depth in, really kind of get the depth to kind of make sure that you're able to articulate your position from that particular area well. And the last piece, which I think is very critical here, is courage. Many people, and you'd see this across organizations, you'd see this across people, organizations, countries. There are two kinds of people who live in the world. One is people who are external, who have the self-confidence, who are always aggressors. They're aggressive in the sense that their job is not to remain within the boundaries in which they've been born. Their job is to go out, break those boundaries, go out and kind of see the rest of the world. Then there are other people and other companies and other countries that defend. So, for example, in the old days, there were little provinces that built these forts, they built these walls under the hope that if you build a wall, an invader cannot come and invade you. So they built a wall and waited inside. And every invader who passed by decided he or she would kind of break that wall. And guess what? No wall survived, including the Great Wall of China, for very long. So the minute you build walls to stop thoughts and ideas that come in from outside, which is the equivalent of today's world, how today's world is built upon intellectual property, you're pretty much done. As a country, as a company, as individuals. Because your ability to understand, assimilate, and react become the characteristics which make you unique in this space. And I'll go back into history and give you a very interesting example. One of the largest kingdoms in the world to ever exist, the Europeans think it was Alexander. We talk about Ashoka. The reality was that none of these had large kingdoms. The largest kingdom in the world belonged to a guy called Genghis Khan. Genghis Khan came from Central Asia. In Central Asia, they didn't have walls. They had tents. And they lived in tents. And they realized that they didn't have much. So the vision was, let's go out and go out into the east and see what we can do to get to China, because China has got plenty of wealth. That is the logic behind it. So Genghis Khan came from Central Asia all the way down, went to the north of India. North, and I say north of India, it's north of India the way we define it, not necessarily the way the map defines it. They went over the Karakoram ranges, which is today part of Pakistan. And they went across the Gobi Desert and they hit the Great Wall of China. Those days, what used to happen was that the emperor in China used to have a system of mirrors. So if any invader came to the Great Wall, or even came to the Gobi, crossed the Gobi Desert, they used to use mirrors to communicate. They had outposts across China. They used to communicate to Beijing, which is where the Forbidden City was, that an invader was seen. Typically, in the old days, the invaders used to travel with, they used to have their wives, they used to have their cooks, they used to have their livestock. and they used to travel. And the Great Wall used to keep them out for a long time. So when the news came that Genghis Khan had crossed the Gobi Desert, the then Emperor of China assumed that he had 2 years before anybody could come to Beijing. And he assumed that the wall would keep out Genghis Khan. Now, Genghis Khan was a very interesting character. Genghis Khan used to have this unique system that he set up. He was known to be very cruel. And even today we hear about Genghis Khan being cruel. So when he used to land up at a town, he used to build out, he used to sit outside the walls of the town, and he used to put up what is called as a white tent. The white tent meant that basically what would happen is in 3 days, if the town, 2 days if the town surrendered, all the women and children and the men in the town would be let free. All they had to do was pay tribute to Genghis Khan, and Genghis Khan would move on. At the end of 2 days, if they did not surrender, then he would put up a red tent. And the red tent meant that for another 2 days, all the men in the city would be killed. But the women and children would be left unharmed. And then at the end of 4 days, if the town still didn't surrender, he would put up a black tent, which meant that everybody in the town would die. Interestingly, what Genghis Khan did was that he never killed the poets, the minstrels, the people who sing, and the writers. Because the idea was that their job was to kind of run away from that city, go to the next city and tell them, look, Genghis Khan is coming, and he's got this process of 3 tents. And if you don't surrender at the end of 2 days, pretty much everything is gone. So he used to also have, in the early stages when he went through Afghanistan, and if you go to Afghanistan now, I went there once when I was a kid, you could see what is called as the Mound of the Dead. So what he used to do was take all the men, put them into a pyramidal shape, and pour hot lime over them while they were alive. So which meant that they would get burnt and they would sit like a statue. And these are little limestone limestone kind of monuments that are built. And you don't have to scratch the surface because you can see skulls poking out of that. And that was kept as a monument, not because of anything else, because he wanted to scare everyone that the next town had to give up. Interestingly, coming back to China, while the Chinese emperor at that time was preparing to get his soldiers ready for a 2-year battle, Genghis Khan was in the gates of Beijing in something like 8 months. The Chinese emperor was not prepared. So the ability, if you go back and look at those traits that remain are also relevant for business. Number 1, enormous speed. Number 2, enormous flexibility. Terrific communication, because the next town had to give up without fighting. The only thing that Genghis Khan missed, would probably be as what we call the moral compass. There was everything else. There was accountability, there was courage, there was self-confidence. The moral compass was the only piece that was probably missing. But he built the largest empire in the world. At one point of time, his empire used to encompass most of Europe, all the way up to Japan. That's the kind of breadth that he had. So coming back, I think, the basic traits that we as human beings have kind of maintained for all these years, which have those traits which make us successful, have evolved as the social structure around us has evolved. But the basic traits that made people successful have not changed. Flipping around, when you go out to work, you would find that to some extent, you can join 4 kinds of organizations. You can join autocratic organization where the boss will say, don't want your brains, I just want your hand. Then there will be paternalistic organizations. Paternalistic organizations are organizations where they say, you know what? We are the boss who runs the place is like the father. And what they will do is they will give you enough money so that you can remain embedded in the firm. Not enough to make you very rich, but they repay that on the flip side with deep loyalty. Then there are the newer companies that have come out, and the newer companies really fall within two broad categories. One is companies that are very free, where small teams exist, where the role of the leader is to kind of make sure that they don't command and control, but they encourage people. They are people who are problem solvers. So the problem solving component is one thing that comes out very clearly. The other piece, which is very important, is there are some organizations that remain very, very democratic. And these are all the newer organizations. So decision making is collective. Ultimately, one person takes decisions. But the inputs are all collective. So whenever you join a firm, depending upon who you are and the kind that you are, you have to kind of ask yourself, where do you fit? Am I better off in an autocratic organization? Am I better off in a paternalistic organization? Am I better off in a completely democratic and a free-flowing organization? And make your choices well, because those choices in a way will dictate the kind of person you will become at the end of your working career. Because some people would like stability, and there's a certain type of company they would like. There are some people who like risk. It's a completely different kind of company that they would like. So those are few of the things that you need to worry about as you go forward. You know, you're at the beginning of your career. There's a long road ahead. The good thing is there is an exciting world ahead of you. It's a world with significant level of uncertainty. It's a world that's changing all the time. And also it's a world with unlimited opportunity. So having said that, just have the courage to go out and do what you think is right, but choose wisely. Thank you. Open to questions. You know, if you have a question and you want to use the chat window, you can do it.
Thank you so much for making us understand about the basic traits required to be a great leader. I have one question. How do you inspire others while keeping yourself inspired about the organization's mission? And also, how do you encourage creative thinking in the workplace?
So let me answer the second one first. I think the idea of creative thinking itself really comes from the environment that you give people. If you have an environment which is very command and control, you'll never get new thoughts and new ideas. So in a way, what happens is that you have to be willing to let go as an organization to say, I'm willing to let go of what I have today, and I'm willing to listen. And that comes down to the boss himself who's kind of running the team. I think the ability to, the world is too complicated right now. And if you don't have that basic ability to listen and assimilate, you'll never create a culture that kind of learns from everyone else. I think that's the biggest trait that you'll require. Second is, how do you keep yourself inspired? And trust me, it isn't easy. Because some of you will go and join sales. If your market share is 5%, when you meet a customer 20 times, you will win once. And when you win once, for the 19 times that you meet a customer, you'll be told that you're a failure. It's the one time that you will win. And by the way, in the tech industry today, in the tech services industry, if you have a share of 1%, you're a good company, which means that in 100 interactions, it's only once that you're told you're a good company or you're a good person. So the ability to kind of put failure behind and look forward becomes an important trait. Failure should not faze you. Failure should be seen as what has happened in the past, you compartmentalize it, and you go forward. Does that give you an answer?
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. Thank you so much.
I have a question. So in your talk, you said that we should stick to one domain, and irrespective of the changing situations, we should try to focus and make ourselves stronger in that domain. But nowadays, organizations look for multitasking and inter-domain people. So what is your take on that, sir?
So I think, maybe I should explain that a little better. What I'm looking for, I think the organizations of today look for T-shaped skills. Think about the letter T. It's broad on top and you have depth at the bottom. So whenever you do something, whenever you pick up an area, have the core depth in one area, but have the breadth to understand and assimilate what other functions are doing or what other areas can bring you to your business to make it effective. So you really have to look and, shape your career on two vectors. One is depth in one and breadth in the other. Does that answer your question?
Yes, sir.
Sir, I have a question.
Yes, Senthil, go ahead.
Sir, when leadership is concerned, leadership gets hampered when we go down the hierarchy. So can we say like leadership is meant only for one in a company?
No, I think every person in the company has to see himself or herself as a leader. So I'll give you an example. Have you seen people who clean your campus? And you would notice that some people look at cleaning the campus as a job where they come in, they get paid for it, and they run away. It'll be sloppy, typically. There are yet other people who have this attention to detail and the ability to inspire other people around them to do a little better. And what you find is that starting with the janitor, all the way up the ranks, you can exhibit leadership in every position that you are tasked with. I started my life as an accountant. I was a chartered accountant. Then I became a consultant, and I used to consult all kinds of people across the world. Then I went and joined General Electric, and I was told, you start a business. So I became the business development guy for India. We started, in fact, I was the third employee in General Electric in the country. We started General Electric's medical arm here in the country. And then I was put in charge of manufacturing. I had no idea of manufacturing. But I was put in every position that I was put in with the understanding that if I didn't know something, I would learn that area. And in turn, I would kind of do something which is very different. And I found that people around me, and this is the funny part, they used to carry what I call the burden of education. The more you're educated, the less you understand the cross-functional aspects of what you do. So in whichever role that you are, if you can go out there and inspire other people around you to do that little extra bit, automatically people will flock to you. Does that answer your question?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
So there are questions in the chat box. I'll read it for you.
It's okay. I'm reading it.
Okay, sure, sir.
So I think there's one question which comes from Avinash, which is, as an organization gets larger, there's a tendency for the organization to dampen inspiration. This is absolutely true. And you would find that the ability to dampen inspiration typically starts with what I call senior management. As you grow older, your ability to take risk comes down. And your ability to take risk comes down because as you get older, your entire focus is in reducing the amount of noise. And I'm talking noise from an electrical perspective, which is that, things that impact you on a daily basis. It's to reduce noise in the system to ensure stability. So what happens is that you end up losing people. You put in structures in place. I give an example of how decision-making happens in some of the older firms. The person on the front knows the issue, knows the answer. But to get approval, he has to go 5 levels up and 5 levels down. It's got to come all the way down before he can take a decision. If you empower people to take decisions, the right decisions on a regular basis, you would find that inspiration by itself starts coming in. But the inspiration piece only comes in through action. It's, it doesn't come from having classes on inspiration and educating people on inspiration. It comes by empowering that person on the front end to take decisions. The best example of this is and I'll give you a very interesting example. This is Southwest Airlines in the US and British Airways. So once I was traveling on British Airways from London and I was going to New York and my flight got cancelled. So I went to the British Airways desk and said, what do I do? I need a flight. I need to get to New York by tonight because tomorrow morning I have a meeting. So the woman said, listen, there's nothing I can do for you because we have only one aircraft which is going to New York because New York had a storm and it's closed. And too bad, can't send you. So I asked her, is there any other airport that I can go to close by? There's Philadelphia, there's New Jersey. New Jersey, I couldn't do it because New Jersey was also caught by the storm, but Philadelphia was free. She said, let me try. And she went and tried and came back and said, well, you know what? I'm going to charge you $700 extra for this particular ticket. I had no choice. I paid for it. Flip around. Few months later, I was on Southwest Airlines in San Jose Airport, and I was trying to get out. And again, I was trying to get to Denver, and there was a storm there. And I had a meeting in Denver. So I said, listen, I have to get to Denver. There's an airport called Colorado Springs very close by. That place, they didn't have the rains that Denver had. This woman said, you know what? Don't worry about it. I'll get you on a seat to Colorado Springs. Leave it for me. Leave it to me. And she went out there and got me a seat. And I asked her, hey, don't I have to kind of pay for this? She said, don't worry. By the way, it's completely free for you. Don't even bother. We know it's not your fault that we had a weather problem. And we understand that you have to get to that location quickly. And by the way, just so that you know, for having put you through this, what we will do is for the next, typically they have a frequent flyer program where every 4 flights you get a free flight. They don't have a card and stuff like that. So we will add on 2 to that. So you need to claim, you can get your free miles after 2 more trips. You don't have to wait for 4. So think about the difference in experience between the 2. One, you had somebody who had to go and get approval from half a dozen people above, which is British Airways. And the other one was a person on the front end who took that decision on her own without asking anybody anything. Now, guess which organization will survive in the long run? So I think that's the key to it. And as we bring younger people in, it's the older people in the organization that dampen that inspiration. Does that answer the question?
Perfectly, yes, sir. Thank you.
So there is one from Indu. If you don't mind There are 3 questions. I need to stop after that because I have another call starting after this. But I'll read the question from Hindu. As far as leadership is concerned, what are the top 3 traits that the individual should have according to you? And what would help an individual to take his or her team to the next level? So I will paraphrase that in the context of today, which I think is very important for us. I think speed and flexibility is right there on the top as far as I'm concerned. The second one would be what I call self-confidence. I think self-confidence is very important. And the last piece, which I think is very critical for you, is the courage to do what you want. You know, I grew up in GE as a company, which is an old company. But interestingly, GE was an old company with a very young mind those days. It's sad to see what's happened to the company now, but those days it was an incredible company because we had a guy called Jack Welch running it, and he was incredible. So the way courage works is, you know, once I had a factory where people, you know, laying people off was very difficult. And I did a voluntary retirement scheme when I had 2 unions, which were very militant in the plant, but I did a layoff. I laid off 400 people. And to lay off people, I had to pay them a certain amount as severance. I signed up with the union on the severance amount. And I told myself, and by the way, it wasn't a small amount those days. This is 97. It was roughly about 25 crores. I signed up a severance amount. I mean, it's 25 crores over a long period of time. So the idea was to calculate NPV to kind of make it more effective. And I did it. And then, of course, the whole GE system jumped on my head saying, how did you do it? You didn't get permission. The only guy who stood up for me was Jack Welch. Jack Welch told me, hey, listen, he asked everyone else, what would you guys do? You think he's done something wrong? So they said, yeah, he hasn't got permission. I said, forget that. Take the action. You think he's done something wrong? And the answer was no. So guess what? Instead of getting punished, I got promoted. So the ability to go out there and have the courage to do the right thing is very important, in spite of the fact that you might lose your career. But again, it goes back to the firm that you choose. If you're working in an autocratic firm, for Christ's sake, don't try it. If you're working in a democratic firm, or if you're working in a free-flowing firm, by all means do it. If you're working in a paternalistic company, go ask the person who is running that company whether you can do it. So don't apply the same yardstick to every situation. That's the only piece of advice I can give you. There's another one from Sai Pavan, which says that with respect to the new company, which type of company will be effective in growing our career, free or democratic? You know, I don't know the answer to that. Depends on the individual that you are. Because if you are a person who likes taking orders, don't go to a democratic and a free-flowing culture. If you like aggression, if you like doing new things, you love challenge on a daily basis, then a free democratic company is far better off for you than a paternalistic or a autocratic company. And the last is to Avinash. What do you think is one mistake you witness leaders making more frequently than the others? I think it's a very interesting question. Leaders fall in love with themselves. And that is the most dangerous part. Because the minute you fall in love with yourself, you're cutting off the external orientation which is required to make you effective. And then what happens is an echo chamber. Unfortunately, that echo chamber remains within yourself. It doesn't go out. Well, that's broadly it. Nothing else from my side. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you, sir. It was a very interactive session, and I take this opportunity to thank our speaker, Mr. T.K. Kurian, Chief Investment Officer and Managing Partner, Premji Invest, who gave his vital time from his busy schedule to grace this meeting with his presence and inspiring words. As Sir rightly said, leadership is not an accidental process. For long-term view of life, we need to grow our leaders with management traits like moral compass, accountability, speed, flexibility, and adaptability. Self-confidence is a very important factor to lead in today's era. Our experiences help us learn better, and the more we stick to one domain, the better we become in that area. Sir also focused on courage, which is very much needed to be a successful leader. A good leader is one who does not command and control all the time, but encourage the team to perform well and take them along. I believe your insights gave everyone the confidence to face the world with more courage. Thank you, sir. I thank our respected principal, Dr. Nikita Alur, for her support and who has been the pillar of strength for all our endeavors. Thank you, ma'am. A special mention to the conveners of the Center for Leadership and Human Excellence for their diligent dedication, which are never overnight, but a continuous effort for the success of this program. I thank the audience for being there with us throughout the session. I thank everyone. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thanks.
so much, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Very good.